Okay, we'll call the special call city council meeting for April the 11th, 2022 to order. If everyone would stand for the pledge of allegiance or remain standing for the invocation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, thank you for your many blessings. We ask for your guidance in our deliberations and conducting the business of our community. We ask you to look at our citizens, our first responders, and our troops. In your name we pray. Amen. Ms. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Hill?
Here.
Mr. Jefferson?
Here.
Mr. Sampson?
Here.
Mayor Whip?
Here.
Mr. Dial?
Here.
Mr. Coberline?
Here.
Chief Butler?
Here. Ladies and gentlemen, the Lake City Council has opened its public meeting since 1968. The city code has prohibited any person from making personal, impertinent, or slanderous remarks or becoming boisterous by addressing the city council. Yelling or making audible comments from the audience constitutes boisterous conduct. Such conduct will not be tolerated. There's only one approved manner of addressing the city council, that's to be recognized and speak from the podium. As a reminder, persons are not to openly carry a handgun or carry a concealed weapon or firearm while the governing body is in session. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Motion and second to approve the agenda is published. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Persons wishing to address council? Okay, if nobody, then we'll move on to presentations. Mr. Jim Hanson, Senior Advisor, is here to do a presentation for us, and we welcome him and thank him for coming over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I'll ask all of you, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. Tonight, if you will, I would plan to talk about who I am, so you get an idea of what I'm bringing to the table here, what senior advisors are that work across the state, the Management Association. We'll talk a little bit about the council manager form of government. I mean to give you a lecture, but it fits into what I'm about to say. I'll give you a personal assessment of your current status, and I'd like to make some recommendations. First off, for me, I'm a retired city manager. I worked 41 years in the business, worked for 4 different cities over my career. I worked in Georgia and Florida, and also have been a recent past president of the Florida City and County Managers Association. At the time, it was an association of about 600 managers across the state. I think it's better, closer to 700 at this point. But I retired in 2017, and I now serve as what's called a senior advisor. Now, basically, a senior advisor is not paid. We make no money out of what we do. If we're lucky, we get reimbursed for mileage and sometimes for meals. I want to say to you, I'm not being paid by anybody here to help out. Frankly, since I retired, my time is too valuable to sell to people. But I'm here because I feel like I can make a difference to cities, as do the other senior advisors in the state. There are 8 of us right now to cover the entire state. It's a big state. We're appointed jointly by the Florida Managers Association and the International City Managers Association. There's a little over 100 of us in the country. We have a few responsibilities. We mentor a lot of new managers. That is to say, we help them learn how to do their job, point them to the right training and resources and that sort of thing. We assist in counseling managers for, some of them may have some serious issues in their cities, and sometimes they'll call us and ask for our advice, and we'll help them where we can. And we assist cities in some areas. This would be an example why I'm here tonight. And we also do searches for city and county managers for the smallest of cities and counties in the state. That's very important, the smallest part, and I'll talk about that in a second. But Lake City has had, first and foremost, the councilman form of government recognized by the International City Management since 1977. It's 45 years. Therefore, I'm here to present something you didn't ask for, but is on my list of to-dos for the year, a certificate of recognition that we give out for every 5 years anniversary of cities that have had the council manager form of government. So this was on my to-do list before I was called last week and asked to come to speak with you. So I wanted to save myself a trip and certainly get sense of what I'm talking about tonight. Council manager form of government. Leave that with you, and
I think you want to get a picture here.
okay. Okay.
Another 5 years of city.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
All right. So essentially, a council manager form of government is where a elected body hires or appoints a manager that works for the entire council, not for just the mayor, but the entire council. It's very, very important. In those forms of government, the policy decisions, the really hard decisions are made by the elected officials. You set long-term policy, approve the budget, make a lot of other difficult, important and long-term decisions, particularly including strategic planning, which I will mention tonight also. Those are the difficult decisions. And I want to say to you, I approach you tonight with the deepest of respect for what you do, because the jobs that you do in many ways are more difficult than the job I have done over the years as a manager. A lot of the things that I would do, there's a right and wrong way to like run a police department, that sort of thing, and it's there's not a lot of value choices. It's a matter of how do you run it properly. The choices you make are a lot more difficult. For example, in approving a budget, do you need another police officer, or offsetting that, can you afford to raise the taxes to pay for it? Do you need to put some more money into street resurfacing, or any number of things? There's no right or wrong answer to those questions. Those are value judgments. And that's why we need elected officials, and we need a body of people to do that, to represent the community. You all bring to the table your different understandings of what the community needs. And I'm a very strong believer in local democracy. Decisions made by a local council or a commission are better than the decisions that any one person could make. I strongly believe that. Consequently, I think a strong mayor form of government is not as good as a council manager form of government. In my career, I've been very lucky to have worked with a lot of very good elected officials whom I deeply respect, and we got a lot done over the years. Now, the manager then in that form of government is in charge of getting all those decisions accomplished, running your city efficiently, and then the staff work under the direction of the city manager, so that the staff has one person to answer to rather than an entire elected board, which is impossible. Lake City has a certain long history of professional management until the last couple of years. And I guess that's why I'm here tonight, to try to help you. So I hope to get you back with some long-term and stable city management. Now, I've spent a lot of time in the last week speaking with people about Lake City, including Renee Narlick, your executive search firm person. She was very generous with her time. Some of the people I spoke with asked that I not identify who they were, and I will not. And I spent a lot of time reading the news stories over the last couple of years about what all has happened with your managers. Needless to say, those stories aren't good. And I will report to you tonight my assessment and my recommendations in a very straightforward fashion. I hope I don't offend anybody, but in my experience in all these years as a city manager, I found elected officials usually appreciate me telling it to them pretty straight. A lot of times I would do that individually, as you probably have had individual meetings with your manager to talk about things like that in the past. But I'm not scheduled to have individual meetings with you, and I think it's probably good for everybody to hear what I'm going to say. First, as to the many stories that are in the paper over the last couple of years, they make your city look pretty bad. Be straightforward, and I'm sure you already know that. You fired your last permanent manager. Usually that's a red flag for candidates that would look to a job. You've had a whole series of interim managers and a whole series of pretty negative stories in the paper about a lot of acrimony in your meetings, a lot of turnover. A lot of your top staff has turned over quite a lot in the last 2 years. Frankly, I do a lot of searches, and certainly I was in the business a long time. I can tell you for managers that are looking for where they want to work next, that would be a huge red flag. And there's probably a lot of managers that looked at your job and said they didn't want to apply because of that. So if you might have just imagine yourself in the place of a manager like I used to be, you would think your chance of success is pretty low if you've had that much acrimony and turnover with your top staff and managers. Obviously, a manager wants to be successful so that their career can be successful. They can show on their resume they worked in a community and got things done, and did good things. Also, if the chances are that you're going to maybe be leaving in a short term, as some cities are known as revolving doors, then that hurts a manager's career potential also. Because as you might imagine, if a candidate came to you and they had a lot of short tenures, they're in one job 1 year here and 2 years there, you'd say, what's wrong with this guy? Why couldn't he keep a job? So as you can imagine, from a manager standpoint, the news hasn't helped. So you got a problem with that. Second, I have spent a little bit of time using the League of Cities data on salaries. I can tell you, my opinion is your starting salary is low here. When you offer $120,000, I think the upper 130s to 140s would be an appropriate salary range if you expect to get a good manager. Two of those things together certainly has made it undoubtedly difficult to get good candidates. Your executive search firm did not quite say that to me, but that's my conclusion that she's probably had a hard time getting as many candidates as she would have liked. Now, those are just a couple of things that I have found. How can I help you with your search? Okay. First off, there are 3 ways that you can go about doing a search for a new city manager. One is do it in-house. That is to have your own staff to take the applications and bring them to the elected body. You decide who you're going to interview and set up the interviews and all of that. A lot of the bigger cities can do that, but obviously that's a lot more sophisticated of a search than if you're hiring a sanitation worker or a police officer or a firefighter. You're probably looking at least across the United States. You're advertising in different places. It's a whole different ballgame. So a lot of cities choose not to do that. You can use an executive search firm. There are a lot of very good ones in Florida. You've hired one of the best ones, and they can do the great majority of the work for you. And most of the larger cities do that. But third is to have the senior advisors to do it. However, I'll tell you right now, I can't do your search for you. One of the rules we've got in the Florida City County Manager Association is we don't do searches in cities populations over 10,000. The reason is we volunteer to do those for the smaller cities that typically can't afford to pay for a search consultant. I don't know what you're paying for this search, but it's probably $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 in that range. That's typical for most cities. A lot of these very small cities can't afford that. A lot of the ones I work with are 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people. Your city, Lake City, is larger than that at 12,000. Now we could, if you did not already have an executive search firm working, certainly could provide some technical assistance to whoever you would have internally to do it. Give them a list of where you need to advertise. I could even help with the review of the applications and all that sort of thing. But we are prohibited, I'm prohibited through our rules of doing this search like I would do. Right now I'm working for Havana, north of Tallahassee. Their interviews are scheduled in a couple of weeks. We're conducting that search process for them. They're, I think, just over 2,000 people. So, it may not be in your best interest for us to do that. We always tell every city when we meet with them that the executive search firms do a better job than we can. Because we're volunteers. There's not that many hours that we're going to put into it. We've got other things to do and we're retired, and we're volunteering our time. For example, when we get help a city, we can put together the announcements and the job profile. We can tell them where to advertise it. They'll usually pay for that. When the applications come in, they'll send them to us, and we can review them on paper and then make recommendations as to who to interview based on what's on the paper. We do not have the time to talk to the candidates personally, and we certainly don't have the time to reach out to candidates. The executive search firms, probably because they do this for so many cities, they know a whole lot of people that are looking for jobs. They may call up, hey Joe, over here, I know you've been looking for a job, consider this one, because here's the real situation. So they can spend a lot of time in bringing you some candidates in. They can do a lot of background research on these candidates that we can't afford to do. We don't even do basic Google searches on people, because it's just, we spend a lot of hours just with what we do, and like I say, we're volunteer. The executive search firms can do an extensive background check with people. We usually tell the small cities that's something for you to do. You ought to pay for a company to get it done, not just criminal and financial, but probably more to the point in many cases is a complete Google search and reference check from the cities that they've worked in before, because sometimes what you find on those will surprise you. So basically, you get a better job with an executive search firm than you would with us. Now, I've spoken with your search firm consultant, Renee Narlick, at great length. I understand she's ready to bring in a number of qualified candidates for you to interview. I don't know any of them. Didn't even ask her the names of them. So I'm not supporting anybody's candidacy for the job. But I'll tell you, from what I've seen, you probably have the best group of candidates you're going to get. It is possible, maybe a couple months from now, maybe somebody will leave a job and all of a sudden they realize your job is open and they may turn out to be the perfect candidate. But the chances are pretty low for that. If I were to publicize a job for you right now, if I could take the job, I'd probably put it in all the same places, publications that executive search firms do. I wouldn't have that outreach of calling the people that I know and all of that to try to bring in more candidates and convince candidates that they know of other places to put their applications in for here. So I think you probably have the best group of candidates, or can have. I don't know if she's given you the current, when she's given you submissions, but she told me that she's got another group of candidates to bring to you for your consideration now. And I'll tell you, a delay will probably hurt you. A lot of candidates, if they're looking for a job, they're probably looking for a job other places as well as here. I've seen this in a lot of the searches we've done, that we may identify a good candidate, we want to interview them, recommend that to the elected body. By the time they get to trying to set the interview, they've already taken another job somewhere else. So some of the best candidates are taken out. As you might imagine, a lot of bright city councils all across the country wanting to pick up the best candidates they can as quickly as they can. And by the way, there are new jobs coming open across this country every day. I get a weekly newsletter from the ICMA that lists jobs all across the United States, and there's probably 60 or 70 jobs in each newsletter. So there's plenty of competition. Also, we're at a time where there are a bunch of old codgers like me that are retiring. So there's a lot of movement in the profession. So with that, I want to make some recommendations. And again, I give you these with the greatest of respect. And I spent a long time trying to understand where I could be of best value to you, realizing that you've got an executive search company. So recommendations. First, I would recommend you move forward with an interview process as soon as possible. And do it with multiple candidates. Don't just interview one or two. Interview all of them. What I've seen is that gives you a better comparison of candidate A, B, C, and D. Because they'll have different strengths, different abilities, and that lets you decide what's most important for Lake City. Again, this is why we pay you the big bucks, so to speak. This is a tough decision, probably the most difficult decision, the most important one that you'll make. There's no right and wrong on picking a city manager. It's a matter of which one is best for you, and that's a value decision. Second, you should be ready to pay at least $130,000 to $140,000 as starting salary and have a reasonable contract, reasonable, like with a severance clause, with good benefits and all that sort of thing. Depending on where they're coming from, you may even have to help with some relocation expenses so they can move a family down here, something like that. So that's going to be second. Third, who to hire. You need to determine what's most important for your city. Cities are different. I've said this to a lot of cities. We have one city that may have been basically bankrupt because of financial mismanagement. You need somebody with financial skills. Another city needs new jobs because the largest employer just went out and people are unemployed. Another city may need somebody that really understands utilities. Try to bring that together. There's any number of skills and abilities and experiences that even personality traits that you may think is most important. But it's important for you to decide what's most important to you before you start listening to these people. Make sure your interviews have questions about it. It's not just on paper. Some candidates may look really good on paper. You get them in front of you, you realize they might not know what they're talking about. Or some people in front of a crowd of folks may not be as personable as you need them to be. By the way, I would think you'd have an interview process that would be more than just in this room with one person standing in front of this podium before you, because it's kind of an odd, singular type of situation. You can have some public receptions and watch how they react with the public, how well they get along with people. Maybe have a tour of the city, let your top staff get to meet them. And sometimes they can ask questions and they can say, hey, this lady over here really knows what she's talking about. That guy over there, he's just faking it. So getting input from top staff often helps dramatically. It's still your choice. But if I were in your position, I would want to get as much input as I can because the decision is so important for your community. And I'll say to you, you're not going to find Superman or Wonder Woman. Nobody's perfect. So it's always a trade-off to see which one's got the most of the traits that you need. But no one's perfect. We'll all make mistakes. But I feel strongly there are a lot of very, very good managers out there who can do an excellent job for your city. However, you got to commit to working with them. Next recommendation, when you do make a decision on who to hire, probably it won't be unanimous to begin with. I would recommend, no matter who it is, and whether it was your first choice or not, make the final vote to offer them the job unanimous. Why? Think of yourself in that position. Would you take a job if it only had 2 or 3 votes out of 5? That's kind of like starting somebody in a bad place. It's like saying 2 of your elected officials don't have confidence in you to begin with. So a lot of city managers will not take a job and split vote like that. Just say, okay, I'm out of here. No matter what you're paying, that's too much risk for me. This is a partnership. To run a city properly, it takes working together with the city council, properly working with a manager, and properly working with the staff to be able to make things happen. In my many years in this business, I can claim a whole lot of successes, but almost none of them can I claim to have done by myself. Most of these things are far too complicated. They've taken cooperation, long-term support from the elected body, in most cases, long-term direction, strategic planning from the elected body. The biggest things we've accomplished are things that my elected officials have said, this is in our 5-year plan, we need to get this done. And it took often 5 years to get that done. Next, I would recommend you commit to working together as a council and with the manager regardless of whether this is your first choice or not. This is like a marriage. I guess most of you gentlemen are married up here. If you can imagine, I'm sure your wife hasn't always thought you were absolutely perfect. I know mine doesn't think that I am. We have had differences of opinion over the years. I've been married, it'll be 42 years here later this month. There'll be times you'll have disagreements, and times you might not be happy with each other, but for the benefit of your city and for getting things done, you have to make it work. What that means is you have to give them your full support as long as they're your city manager. You have to be able to sit down with them and say, okay, Joe or Sally, you messed up, but here's a problem I want you to understand. Here's my viewpoint. It's not a personal thing, but you have to work with them and try to make them successful, because when they can be successful, then you are successful, and more importantly, Lake City is successful. Being a manager can be a very, very tough job. I've done it for many years. I've had a lot of people take pot shots at me, but I can tell you, the worst thing that can happen is not having the support of your elected officials. Sometimes the city's going to be you're going to have people upset with you for, it seems like, anything that you do. You probably had that, a lot of times. But at least if you're working together, trying to move your city forward, you're doing what you need to do for your city. What I'd like to mention to a lot of cities is that being successful usually means being boring. If there's a lot of people coming to your meetings, their problem is great for the public to be there, to have their input. That's all a good thing. But when you're doing your job properly as a city manager and as a city council, the things you're typically doing are boring. You're getting the streets resurfaced so that people aren't tearing up their cars with potholes. You're getting the stormwater systems fixed so that it doesn't flood when it rains. You're trying to keep the police and fire services adequate and substantial, maybe even above that if you can afford and find a way to do that. Those are all difficult things. But typically when you're doing the job right, it's boring. The public doesn't, you're not going to have a crowd of people in here saying, rah, rah, you kept the city from flooding in that big storm last week. But that's the stuff that you need to get together and work on closely together. You've had a lot of controversy in your city in the last couple of years, and that may well continue. But what I'm saying is, working with your manager, you have to work as a team, or your city's not going anywhere. And my guess is, I've had some comments from a few people I spoke to, your city has not accomplished a lot in the last couple of years because you haven't had consistent management. To be effective, a manager has to be here long enough to understand the people in your community, understand the elected officials, what their desires are, to have understood your long-term plans, and to start making things happen. Those are long-term issues. Often we say a manager really isn't effective until the end of his first year. Consequently, by the way, there's an ethics issue that we have that says it's unethical for a manager to go to a different job in less than 2 years, because you haven't had enough time to really pay that city back in terms of honest effort. The first year, if you spend it learning, you haven't got that much accomplished yet, then you haven't earned earned the trust of the public. You haven't done what you're supposed to do as a city manager. So we often censure our members if they do much of that. Say, okay, a job over here just opened and it's going to pay $10,000 more. I'm going to go take that job, even though I've only been here a year. That would be a violation of our ethics provisions. And last, I would make a comment. I've talked with some people. I realize there has not been strategic planning in your city, certainly not in recent years. Now, that's you can call it what you want, but I'm here to tell you, you have the power in your hands to shape the future of your city. If you fail to provide long-term major goals, then you're basically you're not making those choices. You're letting somebody else do it, or they're not being made at all. The biggest things that a city does often take many years. Maybe economic development. It may be a grant to get get a new park built. You can't just go out, 1 month, get a grant, get it built, and be done. So a lot of cities do strategic planning where they get a decision on what you reasonably can do in the next year and in the next 5 years. Then you can say to your manager, the manager can say to their top staff, here are the top issues we're going to accomplish. We're going to evaluate your performance at the end of this year and every other year based on how well you do by these things. And that list of things has to be reasonable too. I would tell elected officials a lot, we can do almost anything for you. We can't do everything. So you have to give them a reasonable list that they can live with. But that's a tremendous power that's in your hands. If you're not using it, then you're really not going anywhere. Because the big things in the community take more than just whatever direction they get each council meeting night. You can't change your agenda as a manager after every council meeting and expect getting long-term stuff done. So with that, I hope my recommendations are valuable to you. Glad to talk with you about any of these. I hope I've not offended anybody with what I've said. Again, I have the deepest respect for you as elected officials, because I understand very well after all these years how difficult a job it is that you do. And I very much appreciate the value judgments that you have to make. You put up with a lot of stuff, by the way, from the public a lot of times. You don't get a lot of pay for it. So I understand all of that. Like I say, I hope I'm not being too blunt, but I found over the years, my elected officials always wanted me to be pretty candid with them. And that's the way we got, from point A to point B. And we got things done. So usually it turned out all right. So, by the way, if you, on the interim issue, I just skipped over that one. I can help with sending out a notice that you need an interim manager. I think if you were to move ahead quickly, as I recommended with your candidates from your search consultant, you're probably talking about getting a manager in here in a month to 2 months from now. When you're looking and bringing in an out-of-town interim, you're usually talking about more like a 3 to 6 month time frame. So I would recommend, if you have any of your own staff in-house or someone else in town that wouldn't have to move here in the short term, which is a tremendous amount of trouble. If you can get somebody to hold the place together for that 1 or 2 months until you can choose who you want to get them here, that would be the best thing. But I can help to send the information around about you needing an interim manager if you want me to do that. So with that, that's, I guess, the best I can give to you. My candid recommendations, and like I say, I hope they're worthwhile, but maybe they're not worth any more than what you just paid me for them.
I do appreciate you coming, and I do appreciate your comments, and I think you hit the nail on the head with just about everything, and that's the issues we need to address. What's the council's desires about that, him doing anything about an interim?
Well, if Mr. Dowell is willing to stay on just a little while longer, that would be my recommendation, to ask Mr. Dowell to stay on just a little while longer until we see what the next few candidates look like.
You mentioned that something about you can help with sending out information.
Mm-hmm.
Can you expound on that?
Can you lean forward, please?
The what?
The microphone. That's the problem. Can't hear.
I think he does.
But everybody's confused.
Okay, I'll repeat it. You mentioned something about you can help, possibly can help send out information if we so desire that. Could you expound on that just a little bit? What
Our
would they be
organization keeps
involved?
a list of managers that we call in transition in between jobs. And certainly I can access that list. I I know one of our other senior advisors forwards a lot of job announcements to people who are interested. He's got a substantial mailing list, email list. I can get something sent out on that just almost instantly. So we can reach a lot of people in not only Florida, but some elsewhere in the Southeast. Like that. But there's usually around 15 to 20 regular managers in Florida that are in between jobs for one reason or another. Some of them wouldn't be willing to come up here and relocate, but I can certainly get that out and see if anybody is interested. But, that's an easy way I can help you.
Okay.
I think we need to explore that or consider that, Mayor. We need all the help that we can get, and in addition to what we're already doing. In addition to help, not gonna impede on what we're already doing and not gonna interfere in any way. So I think we need in a position now where we can, where we need all the help that we can get.
I'd like us to do what he's saying and move forward. Just hope we can get some candidates quick, but I don't want it to drag on because I know Mr. Dials worked hard to keep it going and all, but he's got a lot with utilities and everything else he's got to do. So if we're not going to be able to do something quick, I would like us to get somebody in here, and I think we've used up most of what's available locally. And also, I wouldn't mind us getting some input from that.
I have a question. So, Paul, you have a willingness to stay a little bit longer?
Mayor, council, most everyone knows the reason that I asked to step down before. It was because of someone made some comments against my city, my staff. I don't apologize for that. I won't tolerate that. I do take exception to Mr. Hampson. I am fiercely protective of my employees, my community. I don't know who he's talked to in the community, but to stand up there and say that the city has not accomplished anything. And yes, we might have to work on some of our strategic planning, but as far as most all the departments, especially utilities and some of the others, we're well ahead of where we should be. I don't know the individuals you talk to. I wouldn't mind sitting down talking with them myself. But I do not like comments that degrade any of my staff, and I will not let it happen without making a comment about it. I have my faults. I don't apologize for it. But I think any manager, male, female, regardless of race, color, whatever, would be proud to be the city manager of Lake City. This is a great community. There's awesome staff. You're not going to find a staff any better and experienced and dedicated than what the city of Lake City has. And to say that we're in a state of disrepair and disarray is false. This city runs like a well-oiled machine. Now, yes, granted, is there conflict? Is there some things that need to be worked out? Absolutely there is. But as far as the day-to-day operations for this community and the public, they are taken care of. We address issues. There has been no lack of service. Every department in this city is operating and operating well. And I take offense to your comments. I'm upfront. Everybody knows that about me. But now, to go back to what Mr. Sampson had asked, everyone knows the reason I asked to step down, but I've always stated I will do anything I can to support my city and my staff. And if it's the will of the council that they want me to stay on for a while longer until they decide on a permanent city manager, I'm willing to do that. And that's all I have to say.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, so continuing the thought. So June last year, when we decided to make a change and terminate our previous city manager, to today, I would not make any different decision that day. From where we were then to where we are now, we're ahead of the game. Sometimes the way the news portrays things, they see the meeting is embarrassing. A lot of it is the discretion given by the chair at the meeting. I mean, that's a lot of what we gotta do. We gotta tone the meetings down to make it boring, and that's gonna change perception because, you know, we're not in here talking about the grants and the utilities moving forward. Instead, we're talking about dysfunction, that's words being spoken at a podium. So I agree, and if Mr. Dial's willing to stay on, I say that's what we do. I believe Ms. Narlock's got some more candidates, and I think we should set those interviews up as soon as possible for our recommendations. I don't know if anybody's spoken to her, but let's hear them. Let's talk to them and let's interview them and then move forward. I think in the last group, we had one guy that probably would move forward. But getting back to what Mr. Hanson said about just having one candidate, if you have one candidate, it's not acceptable. You gotta have at least 2 finalists. So I think we need to get a second finalist at least, or who knows, maybe this group will have 2 people better than the group we've been talking to. So I think time's of the essence though, and we need to push the time period. If we can do interviews, you know, next Monday before the meeting, whatever we can do, she needs to get on a time schedule to keep it moving.
Okay.
Well, in that same sentence, Mr. Sampson, I do think that we need to bring that one candidate back, sure. Because like I say, he done his homework on Lake City, so I think he needs to have a second interview. So,
Okay. All right, Mr. Henry, I think that's, the consensus is if Mr. Dial's willing to stay on a little longer, then we'll move that direction. We'll get with Ms. Narlock and that. Any help you can send, if you know of anybody that's looking, tell them to get in touch with her and we'll move forward. But we do appreciate you coming over.
Could I add one comment? I think my comments about not getting things done were misunderstood. I did not intend to say the staff wasn't keeping the city running. What I meant was major projects like economic development, like possibly annexation, major things like that that a city manager would normally work with. So if any offense was given, I apologize for that. I wasn't aiming my comments at the city staff at all. I was talking about working at a different level. And those kinds of things obviously could not have been done because you haven't had people here to do those. Or there's much of them as you probably could have accomplished for your city.
Okay. All right, we'll get with Ms. Narlock and get things moving. I appreciate it. Is there anything else to come before the council today?
Mr. Mayor, I got in late, I can fill out one of those forms, may I?
You can speak.
Good night, about Mr. Mayor and Council. I wanted to just respond briefly to comments that Mr. Sampson made about comments from the podium and about the way you run the meeting. And there may be some fault on both sides, but to give the impression to the public that the reason this city is perceived as being dysfunctional because of those of us who come up here and got issues, I take offense to that. Because the city council, city manager chart work like this: citizens, mayor, council, city manager. We at the top, so we have as much right to stand and express ourselves as critical as we want to be. But suggest in any way that the problem is that the way you run this meeting and the people who look at those who get up and speak is turned off. I take exception to that. That's almost like saying we don't want to hear from you. Or we want to hear from you in a certain way. You got to speak a certain language. You can't be aggressive. You can't talk strong. You can't be angry. And that's just not how it's doing. That's not how it works. Citizens are different today. We are different, man. And so I take exception to the comments that suggest that the problem is at this podium. There are people in the community that think the problem is up here at that podium, not here. You know, and so I just couldn't leave Mr. Sampson without letting you know that I'm like Mr. Dial. I take exception to that because I have a right to stand there. I got a right to say anything I want to say, except I don't have a right to be profane. I don't have a right to be aggressive. I don't have a right to do all that. But I got a right to be as critical as I want to be as a citizen, and I'm going to continue to do that.
Okay, anything else for council? If nothing else, we'll be adjourned until next Monday.